painting with a very broad brush here, but typically the heart of the planting season encompasses roughly about 3 weeks, starting in the last week of April and going through roughly about the middle of May. Weather has definitely slowed planting for us this year, but a bit of a stretch to call this thing a weather market just yet. But we'll talk more about that with the guys coming up. Kohli and Cavanaugh brought to you by the Allen County Farm Bureau. You know, the Farm Bureau is looking out for the interests of Hoosier farm families every single day. And we're talking about from the local level to the state issues, all the way to Capitol Hill. And your membership is what helps support those activities. Please become a member. Go online to itpaystobemember.org. It seems like weather has just been, top of everybody's mind lately. Obviously, trying to get out there in the field, get some planting done. Now, nationally, planting is about normal when all things are considered. It's just when we look out the back door, we're thinking we're way behind. Probably are, but following the weather prognosticators, and we keep hearing about a long, hot summer. But again, here in Indiana, we are soggy. Soil moisture level at 94% adequate to surplus. And John Cavanaugh, you've got some information on the extended forecast.
Yes, this is coming from the Climate Prediction Center, and this is the June, July, August forecast. And of course, that's a heart of the growing season. So that's very crucial weather time, naturally. As David has pointed out so many times, we're changing from an El Nino to a La Nina. And the Climate Prediction Center, their analysis suggests that La Nina is going to take hold sometime in mid to late June.
Wow.
And based upon history, they expect the average rainfall to be below normal in the western U.S. and the Central Plains. Nebraska, Kansas, the Dakotas, Texas, 2/3 of Iowa. Normal rainfall is expected in Illinois, half of Indiana, and above normal is expected in the other half of Indiana, plus Ohio. So in our part of the country, once again, normal to above normal precip is forecasted. Temperatures, however, for the entire Midwest are expected to be above average.
So we are expecting a long, hot summer, essentially, but does it surprise you, David, that they're talking about ending that neutral pattern sometime in the middle of June?
No, I've watched the Southern Pacific ENSO, the El Nino and La Nina, for over 30 years now, and it's very typical to see a very narrow band where it just goes up and down, up and down. Well, this time, in the last 5 or 6 years, we've been seeing very, very low La Nina and then going to El Nino, but it doesn't stay there long. It just goes right back down. It's because of cooler waters off of the west coast of South America. And those cooler waters then push up the warm air toward us in the western Corn Belt, but in the eastern Corn Belt, it gives us a bit more rain, and it also gives us more moderate temperatures. So it actually favors us when it doesn't favor the western areas. Now, of course, the La Nina was supposed to end, they were saying just a few weeks ago, was supposed to be September, October, and November. Now, John, if you're adding to us late June and July, that makes a big, big difference for our growing season for both corn and soybeans.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, it sure does. And if that forecast proves to be correct, that also says we're going to have big crops again in Indiana and Ohio.
Right.
Yeah. Talk about Brazil, because it occurs to me that what's going on down there is one of the things that's really been driving our grain markets here in the U.S. Some parts of central Brazil got over 12 inches of rain. My heavens.
Yes, they did. Now, Rio Grande do Sul was the big bean area that was most affected by the flooding that I've seen so far. There is some flooding in the central part and on the south central part, but Rio Grande do Sul is their big, big bean growing area. And they're just getting ready to harvest the final beans and then switch over to safrinha corn. And this flooding has just kept them completely out of the fields. And Brazil kind of sent a shockwave this week. They said that they're going to be losing 3 million metric tons of soybean crop in Brazil because of the wet weather down there. Now, Argentina is talking about a smaller corn crop. The same point there was because of harvesting problems with the insect infestation. It's calling that stunt growth disease down there that's hurting the corn. They're cutting the numbers too. These have really, really got grain markets going. In fact, there was an old quote that I saw this week, get out in May and stay away. Well, what they're saying now is cover in May, funds, and get away. And I think that's the point of the market right now. The funds finally saw the reason reason to get out, and boy, they are not holding a thing back.
Yes, and David, isn't it true the funds came into the spring with a huge short position? So it was very vulnerable, and seasonally, the markets tend to rally in the spring because the market wants to give the producer incentive to plant. But watch out, guys, because if it does get planted, which it always does eventually at some point, and then you get into late June and July, and we see rains come across, prices collapse. So be careful.
A little sidebar here with regard to South America and what David's talking about there in Argentina. It's that time of year again when oilseed and maritime worker unions in Argentina kick off a strike. Always about this. You can almost set your watch by it, for crying out loud, and it's like, when corn, soybean, and wheat shipments are getting stuck on the dock at this time of year, they just don't like it. So they pretty much cave for almost anything the unions are talking about. So, guys, coming up this next Friday, we got the first new crop S&D report of 2024. Comes out next Friday, May 10th. Historically, what are we looking for on that, David? Because you've got a bunch of numbers there from Allendale giving their estimates, but what are we expecting?
Yeah, and let's look at this very closely with corn and soybeans because this will give us a good idea of what to expect. They're looking for corn planted acreage only 90 million 036, harvested 167. Now that's lesser acreage than we expected. Yields 181. I'm hearing a lot of 180s, 182. And they're also saying that they think that the report on next Friday will be focusing very, very heavily on this because it will affect us on our growing season. I don't disagree with that a bit. Now, on soybeans, the planted acreage is 86,000,005, harvested 85.4, the yield 52 with a production of 4.441. The market's looking ahead to that, trying to get an idea of what next year's crop is going to be. Plus, when you look, I feel, at ending stocks in the U.S., they're calling the corn ending stocks down to 2147 is what Allendale said for this year. They were looking at 2122. Now that was a bit higher. On the beans, 360 from 340. So we're looking for this year's higher ending stocks. But for next year, get a load of this. Hold on to your hat. Corn ending stocks 2.319 and beans at 458. Now currently, the average price for corn is 470 at the farm. And for beans is $12.55. So, guys, we've got to make up some distance here. We look a little bit cheap right now on our current prices.
Yeah, but David, I'd have to interject there and say that you're talking about next year's carryover on corn being as high as $2.3 billion.
Yes.
And you're talking about 458 on the soybeans. Those are huge numbers.
Yes.
Those numbers suggest much lower prices than what you just mentioned. So
exactly.
I'm going to take the other side of that. I think we've got a great rally going here right now. I don't know. It depends a lot upon the weather, of course. But I think this is a selling opportunity, not only for the new crop, but also for the old crop. Because I'm hearing numbers out there from other sources saying that the stocks of old crop corn and soybeans are even higher than most people think, which means we could have a real crash in the basis sometime between now and the end of the crop year. Watch out. Be careful. Get it sold.
The on-farm storage is just unbelievable. I'm with you, John. I've heard a lot of numbers that are kind of concerning. So, maybe take advantage of these selling opportunities. David, one of the things that was kind of interesting this past week was we really saw things crank up with regard to the bird flu as it has gotten into the beef market in a pretty significant way. Now, in a lot of hog operations, you don't have to necessarily worry so much about the birds coming in, but in dairies, as an example, these birds are hopping into the feed, and that's what the beef people were really thinking about, because in the dairy herds, they were thinking that perhaps it was getting spread through the feed. But boy, the market was kind of interesting this past week in terms of prices as well.
Yeah, because broiler production's really been ramping up as we try and get back from the current bird flu infestations they've had. And on the beef market, it's not as effective with the beef, as you pointed out, because mainly they're giving the beef cattle out on the pastures. It's not that many that really on feed compared to how many are on the pastures. But the big story is the dairy, and that's the big issue there, because the feed is readily available. It's an open building, usually with the temperatures that warm, and the birds do get on the feed and start eating it as much as they possibly can. And so that's a big problem for the dairy people at the cattle market at this time. But it's interesting to see how well both pork and beef are doing. On a weekly basis, 22.5 million metric tons of beef were sold, but it was a whole bunch of little bits to countries. But on Pork, 33.6, Rob. Mexico was the big buyer of 21.6. But Mexico keeps buying about all the pork that we offer on a weekly basis.
That's okay. We'll sell it to them. Well, we've come to that part of the program where we do the final word. And because I am the ringleader here in this group, I can pretty much preempt anybody whenever I want. And so I'm preempting Cavanaugh today to tell you about a really fun thing, and that is Farm Dog of the Year. $5,000 for the winner and dog food for a year. That's right. Farmers are invited to submit nominations for the 2025 Farm Bureau Farm Dog of the Year. Not only do you get the cash prize of $5,000, but you get bragging rights as well. Yeah, my dog. That'd be my dog right there. Nestle Purina Pet Care are supplying the year's worth of dog food to the winner, and the $5,000? The $5,000 goes to the farmer and his family to take care of the dog when he eats something he shouldn't have around the farm, and you got to take him to the vet. So if you think you've got the best doggone farm dog, make sure you submit a nomination for the 2025 Farm Bureau Farm Dog of the Year. Kohli and Cavanaugh, made possible each week by support from the Allen County Farm Bureau. Your local county farm bureau supports Indiana agriculture every day, from classroom programs for kids to political action that eliminated the state inheritance tax, and even more recently made an all-out effort to make sure most of the $860 million for Indiana broadband went to Hoosier farm families, the ones struggling with low or even no internet service. Support the Farm Bureau with a membership, and you'll get discounts on cars, computers, and even your next vacation. Go online to itpaystobeamember.org.
Podcasts by Federated Media.